Stop scrolling, because the Lil Durk story just got a lot more complicated than the headline you've probably seen. People are saying, the Fed's witness lied to the grand jury. But here's the part nobody should rush past. That claim has not been established as a proven fact. What is real is that Durk's defense has been attacking the government's presentation of evidence to the grand jury, arguing that prosecutors relied on material they say created a false or misleading impression about Durk's music and its connection to the alleged murder-for-hire case. And that distinction could become huge. Because think about what a grand jury actually does. It isn't the trial. It isn't a jury deciding whether Durk is guilty. It's the stage where prosecutors present evidence to obtain an indictment. So if the defense can convince a judge that something presented to that grand jury was materially false or misleading, suddenly we're not just talking about rap lyrics anymore. We're talking about how the entire case got built. And here's the twist: the government hasn't simply walked away. The case has continued to evolve, with prosecutors adding broader allegations while Durk's lawyers continue fighting the evidence and the way it was presented. So before you believe anybody saying, the witness got caught lying and Durk is automatically going home, slow down. Because the real question isn't just who lied. It's this: what exactly did the grand jury see? And did it change the story they were being asked to believe? That's where this case gets seriously interesting. If you have been watching the Lil Durk case, you already know the internet is moving faster than the courtroom. But slow down, because the real story is even more interesting when you separate what has actually been filed in court from what people are repeating online. Durk's lawyers have made a serious argument about the evidence used to obtain and expand the indictment, and that argument goes directly to how prosecutors presented his music and the timeline surrounding it. The defense has claimed that the government gave the grand jury a misleading picture by connecting lyrics from Wonderful Wayne and Jackie Boy to the 2022 Los Angeles shooting involving Quando Rondo's cousin, Xavier Robinson. Here is where the timeline becomes the detail you cannot ignore. Durk's lawyers have argued that the song was recorded months before the shooting, which, if accepted, would obviously raise a huge question about the government's interpretation of those lyrics. Prosecutors, however, have pushed back, arguing that the version shown to the grand jury included later added audio from news footage connected to the shooting. So this is not as simple as saying, the witness lied, case over. It is a dispute over what the grand jury was shown, how it was described, and what the government believed that material proved. And that distinction matters because a grand jury is not the same thing as the trial jury that ultimately decides guilt. If the defense can establish that prosecutors knowingly presented materially false information, or relied on evidence in a way that seriously distorted the facts, that could create a much bigger legal fight. But notice the wording: the defense has alleged misleading evidence. That does not mean a judge has ruled that prosecutors intentionally deceived the grand jury. That is exactly where the viral version starts running ahead of the verified record. There is another twist that deserves attention. In July 2026, prosecutors asked for access to grand jury testimony ahead of trial, and the defense did not object. That development could become important because the actual testimony may reveal what witnesses said, what questions prosecutors asked, and how the government built its narrative before the case reached the courtroom. Meanwhile, Durk's legal team has continued attacking the government's broader strategy. Prosecutors added new allegations, including racketeering-related accusations, and Durk's lawyers argued that the case had been dramatically expanded after they had spent months preparing for trial. A federal judge later granted Durk's request to sever newly added Chicago-related counts from the Los Angeles murder-for-hire case, giving the defense a significant pretrial victory, while the main trial remained scheduled for August 20, 2026. Now think about why this matters to the average person watching outside the courtroom. This case is not simply about rap lyrics, celebrity drama, or internet rumors. It is about whether artistic expression can be interpreted as evidence of criminal intent, how prosecutors explain complicated timelines to a grand jury, and what happens when the defense says that explanation was fundamentally wrong. That is why the phrase, "the Fed's witness lied," is so powerful online, but also so dangerous if presented as settled fact. The verified story is that Durk's defense has accused the government of misleading the grand jury and challenged the evidence and timeline. The verified story is also that prosecutors dispute those arguments and continue pursuing the case. So if you are waiting for the real bombshell, do not just watch the headlines. Watch the filings, the testimony, and the judge's rulings. Because if the evidence eventually shows that something presented to the grand jury was materially false, that could change the conversation completely. But until a court actually makes that finding, the smartest way to tell this story is not. Durk caught the feds lying. It is. Durk's defense says the grand jury was misled, and now the evidence has to be tested. And here is the question I would keep in front of you as this moves toward trial. What was presented? Who presented it? When was it created? And what did prosecutors tell the grand jury that evidence meant? Those questions cut through the noise. They explain why the story is developing, why sides are fighting over evidence, and why a caption should never be confused with a judicial finding. Now here is where the story takes another turn, because the grand jury issue is only one piece of the much larger legal battle surrounding Lil Durk. If you have been seeing posts claiming that a federal witness has already been exposed as a liar, slow down. The public record does not establish that as a proven fact. What we do know is that Durk's defense has repeatedly challenged the government's evidence, including arguments about his music and the timeline surrounding the 2022 Los Angeles shooting. With trial approaching, the fight is moving from social media speculation into documents that can actually be examined. That matters because prosecutors recently sought access to grand jury testimony ahead of trial, and Durk's lawyers did not object. Attorneys can examine what was actually said during the grand jury process. That could include witness testimony, questions asked by prosecutors, and information used to support the indictment. It gives the defense another opportunity to compare the government's presentation with the underlying evidence. In a case where credibility and interpretation are already being fought over, that comparison could become extremely important. Now remember the song controversy, because the timeline matters. Durk's attorneys have argued that lyrics prosecutors connected to the killing were recorded before the shooting happened. Their position is straightforward. If those lyrics existed before the event, using them as proof that Durk was describing that specific future event requires a different explanation. Prosecutors have disputed the defense's interpretation and argued that later added audio was relevant to what the grand jury heard. The deeper question is when the material was created, what version prosecutors presented, and what conclusion they asked jurors to draw. And this is exactly why you should not let a viral headline do your thinking for you. A defense attorney saying the government used false or misleading evidence is an allegation. A prosecutor defending that evidence is also a position. Neither becomes a judicial finding simply because it gets repeated online. Judges must evaluate the arguments, evidence, and law. That distinction matters. There is another development that changes the temperature around the case. Prosecutors expanded the indictment with additional allegations, including racketeering accusations, shortly before the scheduled trial. Durk's lawyers attacked that move, arguing that the government had changed the case after the defense had spent months preparing. Then the judge granted Durk's request to sever the newly added Chicago-related counts, meaning those allegations would be handled separately from the Los Angeles murder-for-hire charges. That was a pretrial victory, but severance is not dismissal. Now put all of this together. The defense is challenging the government's interpretation of music. The defense is questioning the timing and presentation of evidence. Grand jury testimony is becoming available for scrutiny. Prosecutors are still pushing forward. And the judge has already rejected the idea of keeping every allegation bundled into one trial. None of that proves Durk is innocent, and none of it proves prosecutors committed misconduct. The case is being fought aggressively on multiple fronts. And there is one detail I would watch especially closely as the courtroom action gets closer: witness credibility. A witness can give testimony that is disputed without automatically being guilty of perjury. Someone can remember differently or provide an account the defense later attacks. Proving an actual lie requires evidence that the statement was knowingly false, not merely inconsistent. That is why grand jury testimony could become important. If contradictions appear, the defense can highlight them. If innocent explanations exist, prosecutors can offer them. Those explanations ultimately have to survive in court. So when you hear someone say, "The federal witness got caught," ask one simple question: caught doing what, exactly? Is there a transcript, ruling, or evidence showing the statement was knowingly false? Or are people turning a defense allegation into a finished verdict? That difference is enormous. And as the August 20th trial date approaches, the biggest story may not be one explosive witness at all. It may be whether the government's evidence, taken piece by piece, still tells the same story when Durk's lawyers finally challenge every connection, every timeline, every statement, and every interpretation in front of a jury. That question remains unanswered in court today. Here is the detail that could become the real pressure point as Lil Durk's federal trial gets closer. The evidence does not exist in a vacuum. Every lyric, message, recording, witness statement, and timeline has to survive the same question from the jury: does this actually prove what prosecutors say it proves? In a case involving a famous rapper, music can make everything more complicated. Prosecutors may argue that certain lyrics, videos, or statements reveal intent or knowledge. The defense can answer that artists create characters, exaggerate, reference old events, and use language that cannot automatically be treated as a literal confession. That disagreement is now becoming one of the biggest battles surrounding Durk's courtroom fight. And there is a fresh development you should know about. On August 7th, Durk's defense filed responses to government motions seeking to control what evidence the jury can hear. One dispute involves Durk's previous statements and statements attributed to alleged co-conspirators. The defense invoked the federal rule of completeness, arguing that if prosecutors present selected portions of statements, the defense should be able to introduce additional portions when necessary to prevent the jury from being misled. The practical meaning is simple. The defense does not want jurors hearing a short clip or isolated statement without the surrounding context. Another filing targets the government's attempt to use the music video and audio for "Pissed Me Off." Durk's lawyers argue that the material is highly prejudicial and that prosecutors are interpreting the lyrics incorrectly. They also argue that the song relates heavily to the death of Durk's brother, D-Tang, rather than being evidence of retaliation connected to the charged case. Prosecutors want the court to allow the evidence. So now you have two competing narratives before opening statements. The government says artistic material can help establish its theory, while the defense says the same material can be misunderstood when stripped from context. That is why the grand jury controversy matters beyond one alleged witness. If the defense receives testimony and discovers a meaningful contradiction between what a witness said under oath and what other evidence shows, that could become a serious cross-examination issue. But there is a line we cannot cross without proof. A contradiction does not automatically mean someone committed perjury. A memory can be wrong. A statement can be incomplete. A witness can interpret an event differently. To establish a deliberate lie, evidence has to show that the person knowingly made a false statement about something material. Until a court makes that finding, calling someone a proven liar is speculation, not fact. Now look at the larger courtroom strategy. Prosecutors tried to add a broader collection of allegations, including racketeering-related counts tied to events in Chicago. Durk's lawyers argued that this expansion came too late and would fundamentally change the trial they had spent months preparing for. Judge Michael W. Fitzgerald ultimately ordered those newly added Chicago-related counts severed from the Los Angeles case, while keeping the original trial schedule intact. That does not erase the allegations. It means the government cannot simply use those additional counts as part of the same upcoming trial. For the defense, the ruling narrows the battlefield. And that narrowing could matter more than people realize. A criminal trial is often about controlling what information reaches the jury and how that information is connected. If prosecutors have a long list of accusations, the defense can argue that jurors may be tempted to think, if he was involved in something else, he must have done this too. Separating allegations can prevent the government from automatically putting every accusation into one package. The prosecution still has its case, But now it has to prove the charges scheduled for trial without relying on every additional allegation it wanted to introduce. Then there is the timing. The trial is currently scheduled to begin on August 20th, 2026, meaning the courtroom is approaching a critical stage. Motions are being argued, evidence is being challenged, and both sides are trying to determine exactly what the jury will see and hear. That is where this story stops being internet entertainment and becomes a legal chess match. The defense does not need a viral moment. It needs reasonable doubt. Prosecutors do not need to win an argument online. They need to prove their charges beyond a reasonable doubt in court. So if you are watching this case and waiting for the alleged witness bombshell, keep your eyes on the documents instead of rumors. The most powerful development may be something much less dramatic than a headline, a transcript, timeline, recording, or piece of evidence that does not match the story one side is telling. If that happens, lawyers will have something concrete to attack. If it does not, viral claims may collapse under scrutiny. Either way, the next stage is about evidence, not hashtags. And that is exactly why the upcoming trial could reveal whether the internet version of the Durk story matches what the courtroom record actually shows. If you think the biggest question in the Lil Durk case is whether one witness lied, there is another question that may matter even more. What happens when the defense gets the chance to challenge the government's entire presentation of the evidence in front of a jury? That is where this case is heading now. The courtroom fight is no longer just about headlines claiming somebody got exposed. It is about admissibility, context, credibility, and whether prosecutors can connect each piece of evidence to the charges without leaving the jury to fill in the gaps themselves. The latest filings show just how aggressive that fight has become. On August 7th, Durk's lawyers pushed back against several government requests about evidence that could be shown to jurors. One dispute involves statements made by Durk and alleged co-conspirators. The defense is invoking the federal rule of completeness, essentially arguing that if prosecutors show the jury selected portions of a statement, the defense should be allowed to present additional portions when they are necessary to prevent the excerpt from creating a misleading impression. That sounds technical, but it could become important when a few words taken out of context change the meaning of a conversation. Then there is the music. Prosecutors want the jury to hear and see material connected to Durk's song and music video. Pissed me off. The defense is fighting that request, arguing that the government is interpreting the lyrics incorrectly and that the material could unfairly influence jurors. The defense says the song is heavily connected to Durk's grief over the death of his brother, D-Tang, rather than being evidence of retaliation for the charged Los Angeles incident. If the judge allows the video, jurors will decide what weight, if any, that material deserves. And this is where the case gets fascinating. Imagine you are sitting in that jury box. You hear a lyric that sounds incriminating when somebody reads it aloud by itself. Then the defense shows you when the song was recorded, what was happening in Durk's life at that moment, and what the surrounding lyrics actually say. Suddenly the question changes. You are no longer asking, "Does this sound bad?" You are asking, "Does this prove the specific criminal conduct charged?" That is a much higher bar. The same principle applies to witnesses. A witness can make a statement that sounds damaging, but the defense can attack the timing, memory, motive, wording, and consistency of that testimony. If a witness gave different accounts at different times, lawyers can bring those differences into the courtroom when the rules allow it. But again, disagreement is not automatically perjury. A person can be mistaken without intentionally lying. A witness can remember an event differently years later. A statement can also be technically accurate while leaving out important context. That is why the phrase, "the witness lied," should never be treated as the final answer unless the evidence actually proves it. There is another reason the upcoming trial deserves attention. Prosecutors have continued building a complicated theory around Durk and alleged members or associates of only the family. Their filings describe a broader alleged conspiracy, while Durk's defense has consistently attacked the government's interpretation of the evidence. The court has already separated newly added Chicago-related allegations from the Los Angeles case scheduled for trial, meaning the government cannot simply throw every accusation into one courtroom narrative. That decision does not determine guilt or innocence, but it changes the structure of the case the jury will hear. Now remember the grand jury issue that started this entire conversation. Durk's lawyers previously argued that prosecutors presented false evidence to the grand jury, specifically challenging how the government characterized Wonderful Wayne and Jackie Boy, and its timing. The defense says Durk recorded his contribution roughly 7 months before the August 2022 shooting, while prosecutors have disputed the defense's characterization of what the grand jury was shown. That disagreement is real and documented. What is not established is the internet claim that a federal witness has definitively been caught lying. Those are two very different statements, and confusing them can turn a complicated legal dispute into misinformation. That decision could shape the opening battle. But before you scroll away, I want you to think about what we just uncovered, because this story is nowhere near as simple as the viral headlines make it sound. We have a defense challenging the government's interpretation of evidence, disputes over music and timing, questions surrounding grand jury proceedings, and prosecutors pushing back with their own version of events. And somewhere in the middle of all that is the question everybody keeps asking: what did the government actually show the grand jury? And what did those witnesses actually say? Now I want your opinion. Not the rumor. Not the comment you saw 5 minutes ago. I want your take based on the facts we actually know. Do you think the defense has uncovered a serious weakness in the government's case? Or do you think prosecutors will be able to explain every disputed detail once the trial begins? And if you believe the witness testimony is going to become the turning point, tell me why. Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I want to see how people are reading this case before the courtroom arguments really begin. And if you are following every development involving Lil Durk, stay locked in, because one new filing, one ruling, or one piece of testimony can completely change how this story looks. If this breakdown gave you information you did not see in the usual headlines, hit the like button. Subscribe if you want the story explained without the unnecessary noise, exaggerated rumors, or recycled social media claims. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next major development. And send this video to somebody who has been saying, "The witness already got caught lying." Make them watch the evidence before they make that claim. Because in this case, the biggest twist may not be what somebody says online. It may be what finally gets proven inside that courtroom. So keep watching, keep questioning everything, and most importantly, do not confuse an allegation with a verdict. The next move could change everything.